You will die in prison. Albino, 8-year-old boy sentenced to life for killing his mother. Before we dive into the story, drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. Enjoy the story. The courtroom fell into an unnatural silence as Judge Leonard Wallace adjusted his glasses. The fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across his face, deepening the lines of authority etched there over decades on the bench. Before him stood a child so small that only his white blonde hair was visible above the massive oak defense table. Tommy Whitman, the judge's voice echoed through the chamber, devoid of the compassion one might expect when addressing an 8-year-old. For the murder of Marlene Whitman, this court sentences you to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. You will die in prison. No gasps followed, no outcries of injustice, just the mechanical click of cameras and the scratching of pens on notepads. The public had already convicted Tommy weeks ago, trial or not. In the back row, Eleanor Winters gripped her notebook until her knuckles turned white. As a veteran journalist with 20 years of crime reporting behind her, she'd witnessed countless verdicts. But something about this one clawed at her insides. Perhaps it was the boy's unnatural stillness, his ghostly pale skin, or those vacant eyes that seemed to look through everyone rather than at them. When Tommy's gaze briefly met hers across the crowded room, Eleanor felt a jolt of recognition, not of the child they'd never met, but of something in that empty stare, something manufactured, drugged, defeated. 3 weeks earlier, Eleanor had been fighting with her editor over a different story when the call came in. Body found on Sycamore Street. Female victim, apparent. Homicide. Child present at scene. She'd taken the assignment reluctantly. Another tragedy in a career built on documenting human suffering. The crime scene had been meticulously ordered for a murder. Too ordered, Eleanor would later realize. Marlene Whitman, 32, single mother, lying in a pool of blood. Kitchen knife on the floor bearing the small fingerprints of her son. Tommy sitting silently in a corner, his white clothes stained red, staring at nothing. Open and shut, Detective Raymond Morris had announced, not bothering to lower his voice around the traumatized child. Kid's got problems. Mother probably pushed him too far. These things happen. These things happen. The casual dismissal had bothered Eleanor, but what troubled her more was how quickly everyone accepted it. The fingerprints, the lack of forced entry, the testimony of neighbor Frank Burnett, who claimed to have seen Tommy alone with his mother shortly before the estimated time of death. It should have been simple. Yet something nagged at Eleanor. Small inconsistencies in the detective's report, the way Morris kept steering questions away from certain topics, the speed with which the prosecutor's office moved to charge an 8-year-old as an adult. Now watching Tommy being led away in handcuffs designed for wrists 3 times the size of his, Eleanor made a decision. This story wasn't over. Not for her. Winters! Her editor Howard was beckoning from the doorway, already turning to leave. We've got deadlines. The public wants the Albino Angel of Death story wrapped up neat and tidy. Eleanor gathered her things slowly, watching as Tommy's court-appointed lawyer Marcus Green packed his barely touched case files without a word to his young client. No appeal discussions. No comforting hand on a small shoulder. Nothing. As she stepped into the hallway, Eleanor caught a glimpse of Detective Morris and Prosecutor Harmon sharing a congratulatory handshake. Their smiles didn't reach their eyes. What exactly had just happened here? And why did it feel like she'd witnessed not justice, but a carefully orchestrated performance? Eleanor didn't know it yet, but the question she would ask next would set her on a collision course with powerful people who would stop at nothing to protect their secrets, even if it meant sacrificing an innocent child. Eleanor sat in her dimly lit apartment, the glow of her laptop illuminating the wall of notes she'd already assembled on the Whitman case. 3 empty coffee cups testified to her sleepless night. The official story was simple enough. Troubled child with a rare condition kills mother in a moment of rage. Case closed. But 20 years of investigative journalism had taught Eleanor to question simple stories. She pulled up Tommy's school records, obtained through a sympathetic clerk who owed her a favor. The boy had been diagnosed with a neurological condition that affected how he processed emotions and social cues. Not uncommon in children with albinism, but hardly the mark of a killer. They're calling him a monster, Eleanor muttered, scrolling through the morning headlines. The boy without a soul blazed across the front page of the city's largest newspaper, accompanied by Tommy's haunting school. Photo: his red eyes and colorless hair making him look otherworldly. The media frenzy had begun the day after Tommy's arrest, when his psychiatric evaluation was mysteriously leaked to the press, a document that, by law, should have remained confidential given his age. Eleanor printed the psychiatric report signed by Dr. James Foster, a name she'd seen attached to controversial cases before. The language was clinical but damning. Subject displays marked detachment and limited emotional range consistent with developing antisocial tendencies. Her phone rang. Howard, her editor. "Tell, you're not still obsessing over the Whitman kid," he said without preamble. "Something's wrong with this case, Howard. The leaked psych report? The rush to judgment? When's the last time you saw an 8-year-old tried as an adult in this state? The evidence is solid, El. Let it go. The public's already moved on." "The evidence is too solid," she countered. "Everything's just a little too neat." The silence on the other end told her Howard wasn't convinced, but wasn't going to stop her either. "3 days, he finally said. "You've got 3 days to find something substantial, or you're back on the city council corruption story." Eleanor drove to Westlake Elementary, where Tommy had been a second-grade student until 3 weeks ago. The school looked deserted during summer break, but a few teachers were preparing their classrooms for fall. "Ms. Daniels?" Eleanor knocked on the open door where a young woman was arranging books on shelves. Sarah Daniels looked up warily. "If this is about Tommy Whitman, I've already given my statement to the police." "I'm not here for a statement," Eleanor said, showing her press badge. "I'm here because something about this case doesn't add up." Sarah's professional smile faltered. She closed the classroom door. "They wouldn't let me testify," she said quietly. "Did you know that? His own teacher, and they said my character assessment wasn't relevant to the case." Eleanor leaned forward. "What would you have said if they'd let you testify?" "That Tommy was one of the gentlest children I've ever taught," Sarah said without hesitation. "That he would bring injured insects from the playground so we could help them. That he once stood between a bully and a kindergartner, even though he was terrified." Her voice broke. "They're painting him as some kind of emotionless psychopath, but that's not the boy I knew. What about his condition? The albinism, the neurological differences? Tommy processes the world differently. He doesn't always make eye contact or understand social cues, but violent, never." She lowered her voice. "There's something else. A few weeks before it happened, Marlene came to me concerned about Tommy. Not because of his behavior, but because she thought someone was watching him, following him home from school." Eleanor felt a chill. "Did she report it?" "To Detective Morris." "Actually, he dismissed it as paranoia." Sarah pulled a folder from her desk. "These are Tommy's drawings from the last month he was in school. I kept them when they cleaned out his desk. The drawings were typical for an 8-year-old. Houses, trees, his mother, except for the last few. Dark figures. In the background, the same car appearing again and again outside their house. Morris said these were evidence of Tommy's disturbed imagination," Sarah said bitterly. "But what if they were evidence of something else entirely? What if Marlene wasn't paranoid?" As Eleanor drove to her next destination, the office of Marcus Green, Tommy's court-appointed defender, she couldn't shake the image of those drawings. A child documenting, in the only way he knew how, that someone was watching. Someone the police had chosen to ignore. She didn't notice the black sedan that pulled away from the curb behind her, maintaining a careful distance as it followed her across town. Marcus Green's law office occupied the ground floor of a faded Victorian conversion that had seen better decades. The peeling sign outside read, "Green Legal Services," in what had once been gold lettering. Eleanor had seen this pattern before. Attorneys who'd settled into the comfortable mediocrity of court appointments, collecting government checks while providing the bare minimum of defense. She found Green at his cluttered desk, loosening his tie while sipping from a mug that likely contained more than coffee. He barely looked up when she entered. Eleanor Winters, Sentinel Chronicle. She introduced herself. Case is closed, Green muttered. No comment. Is it? Eleanor sat down uninvited. An 8-year-old with no history of violence convicted of murder after the fastest capital case in state. History? That doesn't strike you as unusual? Green finally looked at her, eyes narrowing. What exactly are you implying? I'm not implying anything. I'm asking why you didn't call Tommy's teacher to testify about his character. Why you didn't challenge the psychiatric evaluation. Why you accepted evidence with glaring inconsistencies. You've got a lot of nerve, Green said, but there was something beneath the indignation, a flicker of unease. The evidence was solid. Too solid, Eleanor countered, echoing her earlier sentiment to Howard. Like someone gift-wrapped this case for the prosecution. Green stood abruptly. Interview's over. I represented my client to the best of my abilities under the circumstances. What circumstances? Eleanor pressed, remaining seated. Green's gaze darted to the door, then the window. I've got another appointment. Eleanor placed Tommy's drawings on his desk. His teacher kept these. Tommy was documenting someone watching his house in the weeks before his mother was killed. Did Morris show you these? Green's professional facade cracked for just a moment. Get out, he whispered, but it sounded more like a plea than a command. What are you afraid of, Mr. Green? He didn't answer, but as Eleanor gathered the drawings, she caught sight of a small card half hidden under case files. A business card for Horizon Developments. Outside, the summer heat had transformed Sycamore Street into a shimmering mirage. Crime scene tape still clung to the small ranch house where Marlene Whitman had died. Neighbors peeked through curtains as Eleanor approached, but no one came outside. No one except Frank Burnett, who was watering his already drowned lawn while watching her with undisguised hostility. Mr. Burnett, Eleanor called. Eleanor, I'd like to ask about your testimony. Got nothing to say that wasn't in court, he replied, deliberately turning the hose toward his house. Eleanor stepped closer. You testified that you saw Tommy alone with his mother at 7:15 p.m. That's an oddly specific time to recall 3 weeks after the effect. Water puddled around Burnett's work boots. I'm good with times. And you didn't see anyone else near the house that evening? No unfamiliar cars? No visitors? Burnett's grip tightened on the hose. Like I said in court, just the boy and his mother. That's interesting because Mrs. Paulson across the street told police she saw an unmarked car parked outside around 7 p.m. This was a bluff. Eleanor had no idea what any other witnesses had said, but Burnett's reaction told her volumes. She's mistaken, he snapped. There wasn't any car. You seem very certain about what wasn't there. Burnett finally turned off the hose. Look, lady, I said what I saw. End of story. Did you know Marlene well? Eleanor changed tactics. His expression darkened. Neighborly, that's all. Really? Because I heard there was an incident last year. Something about a property line dispute that got heated. The color drained from Burnett's face. Who told you that? Does it matter? You testified against a child without disclosing previous conflicts with his mother. Some might call that relevant information. We resolved that, Burnett insisted, but his eyes kept darting toward his front door, as if calculating an escape route. It was nothing. Nothing worth mentioning to the jury, apparently. Burnett stepped closer, voice dropping to a harsh whisper. You don't understand what you're messing with. Some stories aren't meant to be told. Is that a threat, Mr. Burnett? It's advice. He retreated toward his house. For your own good. Back in her car, Eleanor organized her notes. Green had a connection to Horizon Developments. Burnett was hiding something about the night of the murder. Tommy's drawings showed someone watching their house, and a detective who'd dismissed a mother's concerns about being followed was now being celebrated for solving her murder. Eleanor was so focused on these connections that she almost missed the small piece of paper tucked under her windshield wiper. A receipt, folded and weathered, from Horizon Developments to the City Planning Department, dated 1 month before Marlene's death, scribbled in the margin in what could only be Marlene's handwriting. Dirty work, proof in office. Eleanor looked up to see who might have left it, catching only a glimpse of an elderly woman quickly closing her curtains across the street. Mrs. Paulson, perhaps? She started her car, unaware that someone was photographing her from a parked sedan down the block, the same sedan that had followed her from the school. Eleanor had come looking for inconsistencies in the case against Tommy Whitman. Instead, she'd found something far more dangerous, a pattern of silence enforced by fear. And now, whether she knew it or not, she had become part of that pattern. Catherine Whitman lived in a small apartment on the outskirts of town, the kind of place where rent was cheap and questions were few. As Marlene's only living relative, she was now Tommy's legal guardian, on paper at least. In reality, the state had taken custody of the boy immediately. Eleanor knocked twice before the door opened, just enough to reveal a woman who shared Marlene's features, but none of her coloring, where Tommy and his mother had been pale to the point of translucence. Catherine was sun-weathered, with dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. "You're that reporter," Catherine said, neither inviting Eleanor in nor sending her away. "The one asking questions." "I am," Eleanor confirmed. "May I come in?" Catherine hesitated, then opened the door. Wider. The apartment was sparsely furnished but meticulously clean. On the coffee table lay stacks of documents, legal papers, medical records, and newspaper clippings about the case. "Everyone else has stopped asking questions," Catherine said, offering Eleanor a seat. "They all think it's over." "I don't believe it is," Eleanor replied. "I don't believe Tommy killed his mother." Something in Catherine's expression cracked, a momentary glimpse of the grief she'd been containing. "Neither do I. But believing isn't proving, is it?" "Tell me about Marlene," Eleanor prompted gently. Catherine sank into a chair across from Eleanor. "My sister had a hard life. Our parents died when we were teenagers. She got pregnant young. Father disappeared as soon as he found out the baby would be born. Different." Her voice hardened. "Marlene worked cleaning jobs, houses, offices, whatever paid the bills. But lately, things had changed. She seemed scared, but also hopeful, like she'd found something that could turn everything around." Catherine pulled out a small calendar from the pile. "See these marks? 3 months ago, she started cleaning a new location. She wouldn't tell me whose house it was, just that it was someone important, and she was being paid extra to keep it confidential." Eleanor examined the calendar. Every Tuesday and Thursday, Marlene had penciled in W office in the afternoons. 2 weeks before she died, Catherine continued, Marlene called me late at night terrified, said she'd found something she shouldn't have seen, papers in an office she was cleaning. She took photographs with her phone. "Do you have the phone?" Catherine shook her head. "Police said it wasn't at the crime scene. Detective Morris told me she probably lost it somewhere. Earlier. Or someone took it," Eleanor suggested. "Exactly what I thought." Catherine pulled out another document. "This arrived 2 days after she died. I didn't know what to make of it. It was a bank statement showing a deposit of $5,000 to Marlene's account a week before her death. The source, the Horizon Development Fund. Did she ever mention working for Horizon Developments?" "Never," Catherine said firmly. "And Marlene told me everything. This money appeared out of nowhere." Eleanor made a note of the transaction details. "I need to see Tommy. Have they allowed you to visit him?" Catherine's expression darkened. "Once. He's not the same child, Eleanor. Whatever they're giving him." Her voice broke. "He just stares, doesn't speak, doesn't react." Armed with Catherine's signed permission as Tommy's legal guardian, Eleanor arrived at the juvenile detention center, a sterile facility that made only minimal concessions to the age of its inhabitants. A few primary colored chairs in the visiting room, educational posters on the walls, as if bright colors could mask the reality of children behind bars. Tommy sat alone at a small table, dressed in a facility-issued orange jumpsuit that hung from his thin frame. His white blonde hair had been cut short in a utilitarian style that made his red eyes seem even more prominent. But what struck Eleanor most was his stillness, an unnatural immobility that went beyond the quiet demeanor Sarah Daniels had described. "Tommy?" Eleanor said gently, sitting across from him. "My name is Eleanor. I'm a friend of your Aunt Catherine." No response, not even a flicker of recognition. "I'm trying to understand what happened to your mom," she continued. I don't think you hurt her." Tommy's gaze remained unfocused, but his fingers twitched slightly on the table. Eleanor placed a blank notepad and pencil before him. "Can you write anything for me? Or draw something?" For several minutes, nothing happened. Then slowly, Tommy's hand moved toward the pencil. He began to draw with mechanical precision. A simple house, a stick figure woman, a smaller figure with spiky hair. Then, in the background, a larger figure watching from behind a tree, the same pattern from his school drawings. A voice interrupted them. "Time's up." Dr. James Foster stood in the doorway, his clinical white coat a stark contrast to the institutional gray walls. The same psychiatrist who had declared Tommy a developing sociopath in the leaked report. "Dr. Foster," Eleanor acknowledged, gathering her notes but leaving the drawing. "I wasn't aware you supervised visits." "I supervise Tommy's care," Foster replied, smoothly, "which includes monitoring his interactions with journalists." The way he said the word made it sound like a disease. "He's heavily medicated," Eleanor observed. "Is that standard procedure for an 8-year-old who hasn't been convicted of any crime?" "Tommy has unique needs," Foster said, placing a proprietary hand on the boy's shoulder. "His neurological condition requires careful management." Tommy didn't react to the touch, but his pencil pressed harder against the paper, now drawing a dark scribble over the watching figure. As a guard led Eleanor out, she passed a man in the hallway who seemed out of place. Expensive suit, air of authority. He nodded to Foster before continuing toward an administrative area. Outside, Eleanor was approached by a man in his 50s with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. "Dr. Benjamin Harris," he introduced himself quietly. "I'm a child psychologist who consulted on Tommy's case initially, before they replaced me with Foster." "Why were you replaced?" Eleanor asked. "Because I wouldn't say what they wanted to hear." Dr. Harris glanced nervously at the facility. "That boy in there isn't capable of the crime they've accused him of. And those interrogation tapes?" He shook his head. "They fed him every detail, manipulated every response. Classic false confession scenario. You've seen the tapes?" "Parts of them, before they restricted access." Dr. Harris handed her a business card. "There's something very wrong happening here, Ms. Winters, and it goes far beyond one child being wrongfully accused." As Eleanor drove away, she couldn't shake the image of Tommy's drawing, the dark figure watching from behind the tree, the same figure that had been erased from the official narrative, a figure that might still be out there, while an innocent child took the blame. The courthouse archives were housed in a basement that smelled of old paper and forgotten justice. Eleanor had spent enough time here over the years that the clerk, Mabel, barely looked up as she entered. "Back again, Eleanor? What skeleton are you digging up today?" "Looking for patterns," Eleanor replied, signing the visitor log. "Cases involving Detective Raymond Morris and Prosecutor Victor Harmon working together, especially those involving minors. Last 5 years." Mabel raised an eyebrow but said nothing, as she led Eleanor to a computer terminal. 3 hours later, Eleanor had her pattern. 6 cases in the past 5 years where Morris had investigated and Harmon had prosecuted juveniles for serious crimes. All resulted in convictions. All moved through the system with unusual speed. All featured psychiatric testimony from Dr. James Foster. 3 of these kids were under 12, Eleanor muttered, printing the case summaries. Each time, Foster diagnosed them with some variant of antisocial tendencies. The similarities were striking. Troubled children from vulnerable families, limited financial resources for defense, quick, guilty verdicts that boosted careers. As Eleanor gathered her research, her phone rang. "Eleanor Winters," she answered. "Ms. Winters." The woman's voice was hushed, nervous. "My name is Olivia Parker. I was Marlene and Tommy Whitman's caseworker at Family Services." Eleanor straightened. "Was? I've been reassigned, administrative duties only. They said it was routine, but..." A pause. "Nothing about this case has been routine. Can we meet?" "That's why I'm calling, but not anywhere public." 20 minutes later, Eleanor sat across from Olivia Parker in a quiet corner of the Botanical Gardens. Olivia was young, probably fresh out of social work school, with the worn look of someone who had already seen too much of humanity's darker side. "I filed 3 reports," Olivia began without preamble. "Not about Tommy being abused or neglected. The opposite. Marlene was an excellent mother despite difficult circumstances. The reports were about her concerns, someone following them, unusual cars outside their home, a break-in where nothing was taken. When was this? The first report was filed 2 months before her death. Each was marked reviewed in our system, but when I followed up with police, specifically with Detective Morris, he dismissed them as paranoia." Olivia's hands trembled slightly. "After Marlene's death, I tried to access my reports to include them in Tommy's case file. They were gone, completely wiped from the system. That's not possible. Without high-level authorization," Eleanor said. "Exactly." Olivia looked around nervously. "There's something else. 2 days before Marlene died, she called me. Said she had evidence of something bigger than she'd initially thought. Not just someone watching them, but why. She was planning to bring me documents, but..." She swallowed hard. She never made it. Eleanor felt a chill despite the summer heat. "Do you have any idea what the documents were about?" She mentioned a construction project, safety violations, money changing hands, and a name. Olivia stopped abruptly, eyes fixed on something over Eleanor's shoulder. Eleanor turned to see a man in a dark suit standing by the garden entrance, watching them intently. "I have to go," Olivia whispered, gathering her things hastily. "Be careful, Ms. Winters. They're building a wall of silence around this case, and they don't care who they have to bury behind it." As Olivia hurried away, Eleanor remained seated, outwardly calm while her mind raced. Every new piece of information pointed to the same conclusion. Tommy Whitman wasn't a killer. He was a pawn in a game where the real players remained hidden in the shadows. And the name that kept surfacing in the murky waters of this case, Horizon Developments, was connected to powerful people who had already proven how far they would go to protect their interests, even if it meant sacrificing a child. The county courthouse buzzed with activity on the first day of Tommy's trial. Media trucks lined the street outside, their satellite dishes reaching skyward like mechanical flowers. Eleanor slipped past them, press badge visible but head down. Inside, the gallery was already packed with spectators drawn by the sensational headlines that had been running for weeks. "Child. Killer faces justice," and "The face of evil" emblazoned above Tommy's school photo. The prosecution had masterfully crafted public opinion before a single piece of evidence was presented. Eleanor took a seat in the back row as Tommy was led in. He looked even smaller than before, drowning in a suit that someone had clearly purchased without measuring him. His movements were sluggish, his gaze unfocused. The heavy medication was evident to anyone looking closely enough. Judge Leonard Wallace presided, his silver hair and stern demeanor projecting authority. Eleanor had researched him thoroughly, but found nothing unusual. A 20-year record on the bench with a reputation for being tough but fair. Prosecutor Victor Harmon rose for his opening statement. Tall, immaculately dressed, with the polished charm of a man who knew how to work a room, or a jury. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, voice resonating with practiced sincerity, "this case will challenge you. It will challenge your understanding of human nature, because the defendant before you is not what he appears to be." Harmon walked deliberately toward Tommy, who didn't react. "Behind this child's face lies something disturbing, something that the evidence and expert testimony will reveal as fundamentally broken." He gestured to a large screen where a document appeared, the psychiatric evaluation that had been leaked to the press. Dr. James Foster, one of our state's most respected child psychiatrists, has diagnosed Tommy Whitman with a rare condition that affects not just his appearance, but his ability to experience normal human emotions. A condition that, when combined with other factors, created the perfect storm for violence. Defense attorney Marcus Green offered only token objections as Harmon outlined the state's case against Tommy, the fingerprints on the murder weapon, the blood-stained clothes, the timeline established by neighbor Frank Burnett's testimony. During a brief recess, Eleanor approached Dr. Harris, who sat tensely in the gallery. "They're basing everything on Foster's evaluation," she whispered. Can it be challenged? Harris shook his head grimly. The diagnosis itself isn't entirely fabricated. Tommy does have neurological differences associated with his albinism, but Foster has twisted those differences into something sinister, and Green isn't calling any competing experts. When court resumed, Green's opening statement was brief and uninspired, focusing on Tommy's age rather than the evidence itself. He didn't mention Marlene's reports of being followed, the missing phone, or any of the inconsistencies Eleanor had uncovered. As Foster took the stand, Eleanor noticed something strange. Judge Wallace seemed to know him, not professionally but personally. There was a familiarity in their exchange that went beyond courthouse courtesy. Foster testified with clinical detachment about Tommy's underdeveloped capacity for empathy and concerning behavioral patterns. He presented brain scan images that meant little to the jury, but looked impressively scientific on the large screen. During cross-examination, Green barely challenged him, asking only perfunctory questions about credentials and methodology. As the day ended, Eleanor followed Foster out of the courthouse. In the parking lot, she watched as he stopped to speak with a well-dressed man leaning against a luxury car. The man handed Foster an envelope, which he quickly tucked inside his jacket. Eleanor snapped several photos with her phone from behind a pillar. When she zoomed in on them later, she could clearly see the logo on the car door, Horizon Developments. That evening, Eleanor tracked down Lucas Wilson, who had worked with Marlene at the cleaning company. They met at a diner on the outskirts of town. Marlene was scared those last few weeks, Lucas confirmed, nervously stirring his coffee. Said she found something while cleaning some bigwig's office, something nobody was supposed to see. Did she tell you what it was? Lucas leaned closer. Construction plans, safety inspections that were falsified. She said. He stopped abruptly, staring at the diner's entrance. Detective Raymond Morris had just walked in, his eyes scanning the room until they locked on Eleanor. I've got to go, Lucas muttered, sliding out of the booth. As Morris approached, Eleanor realized the connections in this case weren't just coincidences. They were a web, carefully spun and deadly for anyone who disturbed it. And she had just walked straight into the center. Ms. Winters, Detective Morris slid into the booth opposite Eleanor, uninvited. Fancy meeting you here. His smile didn't reach his eyes as he placed his badge on the table between them, a calculated reminder of his authority. Detective, Eleanor acknowledged, closing her notebook. Are you following me, or is this just a coincidence? Let's call it professional interest. Morris signaled to the waitress for coffee. You've been asking a lot of questions about the Whitman case, a case that's already been solved. Eleanor met his gaze steadily. Because I've found quite a few loose ends, such as Marlene's missing phone, the surveillance footage from the convenience store across from the Whitman's house that mysteriously got erased, the fact that she reported being followed to you personally and you dismissed it. A muscle in Morris's jaw twitched. Grieving families often look for complications to avoid simple, painful truths. The evidence against the boy is overwhelming. Too overwhelming, Eleanor countered, almost as if it were arranged. Morris's smile vanished. Be careful, Ms. Winters. Accusations of evidence tampering are serious. I'm not making accusations yet. Eleanor reopened her notebook. Just curious why you never mentioned in your report that Marlene Whitman worked as a cleaner at Judge Wallace's house. The detective's surprise was momentary but unmistakable. He recovered quickly. Irrelevant to the case. Is it? The judge presiding over her murder trial employed the victim, and that's not a conflict of interest? Morris leaned forward. Listen carefully. Some stories aren't worth pursuing. Some questions put good people in bad positions. His voice lowered. Including reporters with promising careers. The threat hung in the air between them. Eleanor felt a chill despite the warmth of the diner. Is that what happened to Marlene? She asked quietly. She asked the wrong questions? Morris stood abruptly. We're done here. Stay out of my investigation, Ms. Winters. For your own sake. As he walked away, Eleanor noticed something she hadn't seen before, a distinctive gold chain around his neck, partially visible at his collar. Something about it nagged at her memory. The next morning, Eleanor visited Quick Stop, the convenience store, opposite the Whitman house. The manager, a young man named Nathan Reed, was clearly uncomfortable when she introduced herself. "I already talked to the police," he said, restocking cigarettes behind the counter. "Told them everything I saw that night." "Which was?" "Nothing. I was in the stockroom most of the evening. But your security cameras would have had a clear view of the street, including the Whitman house." Nathan's hands stilled. "The system had a malfunction. Detective Morris already collected the drives." "A convenient malfunction," Eleanor observed. "Happens right when you might have captured something important." Nathan glanced nervously toward the back of the store. "Look, I can't talk about this." "Can't? Or won't?" His voice dropped to a whisper. "You don't understand. They came back after the official visit. Told me to wipe the backup files too. Said it was procedure." "Who came back?" "Morris and another guy. Didn't get his name, but he wasn't police. Expensive suit. They took everything, even my personal tablet that I sometimes connect to the security feed." "When was this?" "Day after it happened, before they even charged the kid." Nathan leaned closer. "The thing is, I did see something that night. A police car, unmarked but with the light bar, parked down the block for over an hour. Left right around when it happened." Eleanor felt her pulse quicken. "Did you tell Morris this?" "I tried. He said I was mistaken, that patrol logs showed no units in that area." Nathan's eyes darted to the door as the bell jingled. "You need to go now." As Eleanor drove away from Quick Stop, her phone rang. Unknown number. "Eleanor Winters," she answered. "Stop asking questions." A digitally altered voice, impossible to identify. "The boy is guilty. The case is closed." "Who is this?" "Next time it won't be a warning." The line went dead. Eleanor pulled over, hands shaking slightly as she wrote down the exact words. When she looked up, she noticed a black sedan parked across the street, the same one she'd glimpsed before. This time she was ready. She snapped several photos as the car pulled away, capturing a partial license plate. Back at her apartment, Eleanor pinned the new information to her case wall. The convenience store's wiped footage, Morris's threatening behavior, the mysterious sedan, the unnamed man in the expensive suit. And at the center, a small drawing made by Tommy Whitman, a stick figure with a distinctive necklace watching from behind a tree, a necklace that looked remarkably similar to the gold chain Detective Morris wore around his neck. Eleanor hadn't slept in 36 hours. Her apartment walls had become a spider's web of connections, photos, documents, and yellow string linking seemingly disparate elements of the Whitman case. Her editor, Howard, stood before this wall, coffee forgotten in his hand as he absorbed the scope of her investigation. "This is extensive," he finally said. "It's a conspiracy," Eleanor replied. "Morris, Harmon, Foster, and Judge Wallace, all connected to Horizon Developments, all working to frame an 8-year-old boy." Howard's expression remained skeptical. "That's a serious accusation, El. The kind that ends careers if you're wrong." "I'm not wrong, Marlene. Whitman found something while cleaning Wallace's office. Something about Horizon's construction projects, safety violations, falsified inspections, bribes." Eleanor pointed to the receipt she'd found. She was gathering evidence. "And you think they killed her for it?" "That's a huge leap." "Is it?" "She reports being followed. Security footage disappears, her phone vanishes. Then she's murdered, and her neurologically atypical son is framed with evidence that's too perfect." Eleanor's voice rose with intensity. "They're using Tommy's condition against him, Howard. They knew his differences would make him an easy target." Howard set down his coffee. "Even if you're right, we can't publish this without more concrete proof. I need access to the crime scene photos, the official ones. That's not going to happen through legal channels. Not with Morris blocking you." Eleanor smiled grimly. "Who said anything about legal channels?" Dr. Allison Chambers was a forensic pathologist who had consulted for the Chronicle on previous stories. More importantly, she owed Eleanor a favor after Eleanor had exposed corruption in the medical examiner's office that had threatened Chambers' career. They met in Chambers' private lab after hours. "These came from a source inside the department," Eleanor explained, spreading out copies of the Whitman crime scene photos she'd obtained through one of her contacts. "I need an expert opinion." Chambers studied them methodically, her expression growing increasingly troubled. "Where did you get the full sequence?" "Does it matter?" "It matters because these aren't consistent." Chambers pointed to subtle differences between photos. "Look at the blood spatter here, then here in the supposedly next sequential shot. The patterns don't match. And the position of the knife changes between these images." Eleanor leaned closer. "Meaning?" "Meaning someone manipulated the scene between photographs. Probably didn't expect anyone to analyze the full sequence." Chambers continued her examination. "The angle of the fatal wound is wrong too, based on these measurements." "Wrong how?" "The trajectory indicates the assailant was significantly taller than the victim, at least 6 feet tall." Chambers looked up. "Not the height of an 8-year-old child." Eleanor felt a surge of vindication. "What about the fingerprints on the knife?" "Present, but—" Chambers frowned, studying the evidence report. "The distribution is odd. Children grip objects differently than adults. These prints suggest the knife was placed in his hand while he was unconscious or barely responsive, not gripped during an attack." Armed with this new information, Eleanor made a bold decision. She returned to the scene of the crime itself. The Whitman house sat empty, still sealed with police tape, though the investigation was officially closed. Using the spare key Catherine had given her, Eleanor slipped inside as dusk fell. The small living room was frozen in time, furniture in place but with the eerie emptiness of a home abruptly abandoned. In the kitchen, faint bloodstains remained despite cleaning attempts, a ghostly reminder of Marlene's final moments. Eleanor worked methodically, comparing the space to the crime scene photos, noting the inconsistencies Dr. Chambers had identified. She measured angles, sightlines, distances, building a mental reconstruction that contradicted the official narrative. The attack hadn't happened as Morris claimed. The evidence had been arranged. In Tommy's bedroom, Eleanor found crayon drawings, hidden beneath the bed, more images of the watching figure with the distinctive necklace. But there was something else in these drawings that hadn't been in the others. A house that wasn't the Whitmans. A larger house with columns and a circular driveway. A house that looked remarkably like Judge Wallace's residence. As Eleanor photographed the drawings, she heard the unmistakable sound of a car pulling up outside. Headlights swept across the window as an engine cut off. She had seconds to make a decision. Hide or confront whoever had arrived. The choice was made for her when she heard a key in the front door lock. A key that only the police should have had. Footsteps entered the house. Heavy, deliberate footsteps heading directly for Tommy's room. Eleanor pressed herself against the wall behind Tommy's bedroom door, heart thundering in her chest. The footsteps paused in the hallway, then continued with purpose. Detective Morris entered the room, his flashlight beam sweeping methodically across the space. Eleanor held her breath as the light passed inches from her hiding spot. Morris moved directly to Tommy's bed, kneeling to reach underneath exactly where Eleanor had found the hidden drawings. His hand groped in the empty space, his frustrated exhale audible in the silent house. "They're not here," he muttered into a phone Eleanor hadn't realized he was holding. "Someone's been here already." A pause as he listened to the response. "No, the place is empty. I'll do another. I'll do." "Weep, to be sure." As Morris turned to leave, his flashlight illuminated a small detail Eleanor had missed. A loose floorboard beneath the window. He pried it up, revealing a small cavity containing a child's tin box. Inside was a cheap digital voice recorder. Morris pressed play, and Marlene. Whitman's voice filled the room. "If anything happens to me, this is why. They're falsifying safety reports for the Riverside Elementary reconstruction. Judge Wallace is involved. The plans show inadequate support structures that wouldn't survive a minor earthquake. I've copied the documents." "There." Morris stopped the recording and pocketed the device. "Found it," he said into the phone. "The backup recording she mentioned to her sister. No, doesn't say where she hid the documents." Eleanor's camera was still in her hand. Moving with infinite caution, she managed to capture several photos of Morris standing over the hiding spot. As he turned to leave, his flashlight caught the edge of her shoe. Morris froze. Who's there? Eleanor had a split second to decide. Running was impossible. Fighting, suicidal. She stepped forward. Detective Morris, funny meeting you here. His expression moved from shock to cold fury. Breaking and entering is a felony, Ms. Winters. So is evidence tampering, she countered, nodding toward the recorder in his pocket. And perverting the course of justice. You have no idea what you're involved in. Morris took a step toward her, hand moving toward his weapon. I know exactly what I'm involved in, Eleanor said, backing toward the doorway. Marlene found safety violations in Horizon's construction plans for Riverside Elementary, the same school that partially collapsed last year, injuring 12 children. She found proof that Judge Wallace and others were involved in covering it up. Morris's expression confirmed her theory. And now you think you can just write a story and everything will come tumbling down? You're naive. Maybe, but I'm also thorough. Eleanor raised her phone. I just recorded this entire conversation, and I'm not the only one with the information anymore. This was a bluff. She hadn't been recording. But Morris's moment of uncertainty gave her the opening she needed. She slipped past him into the hallway. This isn't over, Morris called after her. No, Eleanor agreed, her voice steadier than she felt. It's just beginning. Outside, she hurried to her car, hands shaking as she started the engine. The encounter had been dangerous, but productive. She now had confirmation of Marlene's discovery, photographic evidence of Morris tampering with the crime scene, and knowledge of the voice recorder's contents. What she didn't have was the actual documentation Marlene had mentioned. Back at her apartment, Eleanor found an unmarked envelope that had been slid under her door. Inside was a DVD with no label. She played it on her laptop, recognizing immediately that it was from the Juvenile Detention Center's security system. The footage showed Tommy's interrogation, something that had been kept from both the defense and the media. In the video, Morris and Dr. Foster systematically broke down an exhausted, confused child. They supplied details about the murder that Tommy clearly didn't know, then manipulated him into repeating them back as if they were his own memories. Tell us about the knife, Tommy, Morris said on the recording. The one from the kitchen drawer, the black-handled one. Tommy, barely able to keep his eyes open, just stared. Remember? The black knife from the kitchen drawer, Morris repeated more forcefully. The one you used. After enough repetition, Tommy began to nod weakly when presented with these facts. As Eleanor watched the systematic destruction of a child's reality, a text message arrived on her phone from an unknown number. There's more. Former cop who worked with Morris wants to talk. Tomorrow, Riverside Park, 7 a.m., come alone. The video was damning, but Eleanor knew it wouldn't be enough on its own. She needed the documents Marlene had hidden, the proof of the corruption that had cost the young mother her life. And, if Morris's reaction was any indication, she wasn't the only one still hunting for them. Riverside Park was deserted at 7 in the morning, the early summer mist still clinging to the grass. Eleanor sat on a bench with clear sightlines in all directions, a precaution that now seemed essential. Rather than paranoid, a man approached from the jogging path, mid-60s, retired police posture evident in his ramrod straight back. Walter Brooks had the weathered face of someone who'd seen too much, and the cautious eyes of someone who knew the cost of talking about it. Didn't think you'd actually come, he said, settling beside her without introduction. You have information about Morris, Eleanor replied simply. Brooks nodded, scanning their surroundings before speaking. Worked with him 15 years. Ray wasn't always what he is now. Used to be a good cop until he got tangled up with people like Wallace and Harmon. What changed? Ambition, debt, the usual. Brooks's mouth tightened. 5 years ago, Morris caught a case, similar to the Whitman situation. Evidence didn't add up, but powerful people wanted it closed fast. He fabricated what was needed. And since then, it became a pattern. Morris delivers quick convictions that benefit certain people. Those people make sure his career advances. Brooks handed her a small notebook. I've documented 7 cases where I suspect evidence tampering. 3 involved minors. Eleanor flipped through the notebook. Detailed, damning observations from a career policeman. Why come forward now? Because framing a child crosses a line I can't ignore. Brooks's voice hardened. And because they're getting sloppy. Too confident. The Whitman case has mistakes all over it. Like what? Frank Burnett's testimony. I know for a fact he wasn't home that night. He was at the last call bar from 6 to 11. I was there too. Morris must have pressured him to lie. This confirmed what Eleanor had already suspected. There's something else, Brooks continued. After Marlene's murder, Morris requested a rush cleaning of an unmarked patrol car. Unusual procedure, especially since he claimed not to have been near the Whitman house that night. Eleanor's pulse quickened. Do you think Morris killed her? I think Morris follows orders, Brooks said carefully. Someone wanted Marlene silenced and Tommy blamed. Someone with enough power to make evidence disappear and orchestrate a frame job. Judge Wallace. Brooks neither confirmed nor denied, but his expression spoke volumes. They're going to realize I've talked to you, he said, standing. I've made arrangements to leave town. You should consider doing the same. I can't. Not until Tommy's free. As Brooks walked away, he paused. Check the courthouse cleaning staff schedules for the night Marlene died. And be careful who you trust. Even Green is compromised. Eleanor sat alone on the bench, processing this new information. The courtroom was in session. Tommy's trial proceeding with mechanical efficiency toward its predetermined conclusion. She needed to speak with Frank Burnett again, this time with leverage. At Burnett's house, she found him packing his car, clearly preparing for a hasty departure. Going somewhere, Mr. Burnett? Eleanor called, approaching the driveway. He froze, then resumed shoving bags into his trunk. Just a short trip. Strange timing with your testimony being so central to the case. Said what I needed to say. His eyes darted nervously to his front door and back. I know you weren't home that night, Eleanor said calmly. You were at the last call from 6 to 11. Multiple witnesses can confirm it. Burnett's shoulders slumped. What do you want? The truth, before an innocent child spends his life in prison. The front door opened behind them, and Detective Morris stepped onto the porch. Mr. Burnett, he called, his hand resting casually on his holstered weapon. I believe this conversation is over. Eleanor maintained a composed exterior despite the alarm bells ringing in her mind. Morris's presence at Burnett's house confirmed her suspicions. They were monitoring the witness, ensuring his testimony remained intact. Detective Morris, she acknowledged. Still working overtime on a closed case? Just checking on a key witness, Morris replied smoothly, making sure he's not being harassed by overzealous reporters. Burnett looked between them, a man caught. Between two forces, fear radiated from him in almost visible waves. Tell her, Frank, Morris prompted. Tell Ms. Winters you're standing by your testimony. Burnett nodded mechanically. I saw what I saw. Eleanor addressed him directly. Even though you were at the last call bar that night, I have witnesses, Mr. Burnett, and security footage. A flash of panic crossed his face before Morris intervened. That's enough, the detective snapped. Mr. Burnett is not obligated to speak with you, and fabricating evidence is a serious offense, Ms. Winters. Funny. I was about to say the same to you. The tension between them was broken by Eleanor's phone. A text message from an unfamiliar number. Need to speak urgently about Tommy's medication. Patricia Coleman, juvenile center nurse. Eleanor retreated strategically. We'll continue this conversation later, Mr. Burnett. Perhaps in the court, under oath. Morris stepped forward. Stay away from my witnesses, Winters. Final warning. 20 minutes later, Eleanor met Patricia Coleman in the hospital parking garage where the nurse was ending her shift. A petite woman with tired eyes and the efficient movements of someone who had spent decades in emergency rooms. They're keeping Tommy heavily sedated, Patricia began without preamble. Way beyond what's medically indicated. Some days he can barely function. Why? Officially, they claim it's to manage his aggressive tendencies. But the boy I've observed isn't aggressive, he's traumatized. Patricia glanced around nervously. But there's more. Dr. Foster has been visiting Tommy outside of scheduled hours. No documentation, no supervision. When? Late nights, when staffing is minimal. He signs in as performing emergency psychiatric evaluation, but spends hours alone with Tommy. Patricia lowered her voice. After these sessions, Tommy is different, more confused, like he's being programmed. Programmed to confess, Eleanor murmured. There's something else. The week before Marlene Whitman was killed, she called the center trying to reach me. We were friends. I'd helped get Tommy's medication adjusted when he was first diagnosed. Patricia's expression darkened. She was frantic, said she needed a safe place to store something. Before I could get details, the call was disconnected. Did she try again? No. Next thing I heard, she was dead. Patricia handed Eleanor a small keycard. This will get you into the staff entrance. Tommy's being kept in the isolation wing, room 114. The medications taper off around midnight. That's your window if you want to talk to him. Eleanor stared at the keycard. This could cost you your job. Some things matter more than jobs, Patricia replied simply. That boy doesn't belong in our facility. And whatever they're making him believe about that night, it isn't true. As Eleanor drove toward the newspaper office, her rear-view mirror revealed a now familiar black sedan following at a careful distance. The surveillance was becoming more obvious, a pressure tactic meant to intimidate her into abandoning the investigation. Instead, it confirmed she was getting closer to the truth. In her office, Eleanor found Howard waiting with a grave expression. The publisher called, he said, without greeting. We've received a formal request from the DA's office to cease interfering with an ongoing trial. They're threatening legal action against the paper. Because we're getting close, Eleanor insisted, spreading her latest findings across her desk. Howard, Tommy Whitman is being drugged and manipulated into believing he killed his mother. Morris and Foster are fabricating evidence. Wallace is orchestrating all of it to cover up corruption at Horizon Developments. Howard studied the material, his journalistic instincts warring with practical concerns. Even if you're right, we need something concrete before we can publish, something undeniable. I'm going to talk to Tommy tonight. The real Tommy, not the drugged version they parade in court. That's breaking about a dozen laws, Howard warned. So is framing a child for murder. As dusk fell, Eleanor prepared for her nighttime visit to the juvenile facility. What she didn't know was that someone else was preparing too. Someone who had bugged her office days ago. Someone who was listening as she revealed her plans. Someone who couldn't allow her to speak with Tommy Whitman. The Juvenile Detention Center was a EA, shadow against the night sky, its windows illuminated in a grid of fluorescent squares. Eleanor approached from the rear parking lot, Patricia's keycard clutched tightly in her hand. The staff entrance beeped softly as she swiped the card. Inside, the antiseptic smell and institutional quiet enveloped her. Following Patricia's instructions, Eleanor navigated the corridors, ducking into doorways whenever footsteps approached. Room 114 was at the end of a quiet hallway. The door had a small observation window, through which Eleanor could see Tommy sitting on the edge of his bed, staring at nothing. Even from a distance, she could tell he was more alert than in court, the evening medication wearing off as Patricia had predicted. Eleanor swiped the card again. The lock clicked. Tommy looked up, no recognition in his expression, just wary confusion. Tommy, Eleanor whispered, kneeling. To his eye level, my name is Eleanor. I'm trying to help you. The boy's pale eyebrows drew together. You were in court, he said, his voice raspy from disuse. Watching. That's right. I don't think you hurt your mom, Tommy. I think someone else did, and they're trying to make you believe you did it. His red-tinged eyes filled with tears. I don't remember. They keep telling me I did it. They show me pictures. What kind of pictures? Mom, blood, the knife. His small hands twisted in his lap. Dr. Foster says my brain blocked it out because I'm sick, that I killed her and forgot. You're not sick, Tommy. You're different, but that's not the same thing. Eleanor reached into her bag, producing Tommy's school drawings that Sarah Daniels had given her. You drew these before your mom died. You were trying to show that someone was watching your house. Do you remember? Tommy's fingers touched the papers tentatively. The man with the necklace. Yes, can you tell me who he is? He came to the house sometimes, To talk to Mom. She would tell me to go to my room. Tommy's face scrunched with effort. She was scared of him. Was it Detective Morris, the police officer from court? Tommy nodded slowly. He has the special necklace, gold with a circle thing. A medallion, Eleanor supplied. St. Michael, the patron saint of police officers. He was there that night, Tommy whispered. I remember now. He came to the door. Mom was upset. They argued. Eleanor's heart raced. What happened next, Tommy? Mom told me to hide in my special place, the closet with the false wall. She put me there when bad men came. His voice became distant. I heard shouting, something breaking. Then it got quiet. And then, I waited a long time. When I came out, Tommy's eyes glazed with the memory. Mom was on the floor. Detective Morris was there. He grabbed my arms, put them on something, then the knife. Said if I told anyone, they'd hurt Aunt Catherine too. Eleanor fought to keep her voice steady. Tommy, this is very important. Did your mom hide anything before she died? Papers or photos? The boy nodded. In my special place, behind the loose brick. Eleanor made a mental note to return to the Whitman house. The hiding spot she'd seen Morris searching wasn't the only one. A noise in the hallway caught her attention. Footsteps approaching quickly. I have to go, she whispered. Tommy, you didn't hurt your mom. I'm going to prove it. As she slipped out the door, Tommy called after her softly. The other man was there too. Eleanor paused. What other man? The judge, the one Mom cleaned for. He watched while Detective Morris hurt her. The revelation hit Eleanor like a physical blow. Not just a cover-up, a direct involvement. Judge Wallace had been present for Marlene's murder. She barely made it around the corner before 2 security guards and Dr. Foster rushed toward Tommy's room. Someone had discovered her intrusion. Eleanor escaped through a service exit, her mind reeling with the implications of Tommy's testimony. Judge Wallace hadn't just orchestrated the cover-up from a distance. He had been an active participant in Marlene's murder. As she drove away, Eleanor didn't notice the dark SUV pulling out behind her until it suddenly accelerated, ramming into her rear bumper at high speed. Her car spun wildly, skidding toward the steep embankment alongside the road. The last thing she saw before impact was the face of her pursuer in her rearview mirror. Detective Raymond Morris, his gold St. Michael medallion catching the moonlight as he deliberately forced her off the road. Eleanor awoke to the rhythmic beeping of hospital monitors. Her body screamed with pain, but she was alive. Something that seemed miraculous given her last memory of Morris forcing her car off the road. Easy there, a familiar voice cautioned as she tried to sit up. Howard sat in a chair beside her bed, looking like he hadn't slept in days. 3 broken ribs, concussion, and a dislocated shoulder. The doctors say you're lucky. Morris, Eleanor managed, her voice hoarse. He ran me off the road. The official report says you lost control. On a wet curve. No other vehicle involved. Howard's expression was grim. Your car is totaled, but they recovered your bag. I've secured your notes. Tommy told me everything, Eleanor whispered urgently. Morris killed Marlene. Wallace was there. They framed Tommy to cover it up. That's a hell of an accusation. It's the truth. I need to get back to the Whitman house. Tommy said his mother hid documents in a secret compartment. Howard shook his head. You're not going anywhere for at least 2 days. And there's something else you should know. He handed her a newspaper. The headline made her blood run cold. Journalist charged with evidence tampering, obstruction. They've pulled your press credentials, Howard continued. There's a restraining order preventing you from coming within 500 feet of the courthouse or any witnesses. The publisher is concerned. They're trying to silence me, Eleanor said, struggling again to sit up despite the pain. Which means we're close. Be reasonable. These are powerful people. Judge Wallace called the publisher personally. And you're just going to let them frame an innocent child? Let them get away with murder? Howard looked away. The paper's official position is that we're cooperating fully with authorities. And what's your position, Howard? A long pause. Then, I've contacted some people. The Innocence Project has agreed to review the case. Their lawyers will be here tomorrow. Eleanor felt a surge of hope. They need to see everything we've found, and someone needs to check that hidden compartment in the Whitman house before Morris gets to it. Already handled, Howard said, lowering his voice. Catherine is meeting their investigator there tonight. A knock interrupted them. A nurse entered, followed by 2 uniformed police officers. Ms. Winters, one began formally, you're being discharged into custody for questioning regarding interference with an active investigation. Howard stood. My colleague needs medical attention. She's been cleared by the doctor, the officer replied, unmoved. We have a warrant. As they handcuffed her to the hospital bed, Eleanor locked eyes with Howard. Get the documents. Save Tommy. At the police station, Eleanor was placed in an interrogation room. Her injured ribs throbbed with each breath. The door opened, revealing not Morris, but Prosecutor Victor Harmon. Ms. Winters, he began smoothly, you've created quite a problem for yourself. Funny, I was thinking the same about you, Eleanor replied. Conspiring to frame a child for murder. That's a career ender. Harmon's smile didn't waver. Interesting theory. Completely. Unfounded, but interesting. I have Tommy's testimony. Morris forced him to touch the murder weapon after Marlene was already dead. Wallace was present at the murder scene. A flicker of unease crossed Harmon's face before his composure returned. The ramblings of a disturbed child under the influence of a journalist with a history of, let's call it creative reporting. I know about Horizon developments, Eleanor pressed. The falsified safety reports for Riverside Elementary, the kickbacks to city officials. Marlene found the documentation, and you had her killed for it. Careful. Ms. Winters, defamation has serious consequences. So does murder. Harmon leaned forward. Let me be clear. By this time tomorrow, Tommy Whitman will be formally sentenced. This case will be closed. Your crusade will be nothing but a footnote, and your career will be over. Unless I find what Marlene hid, Eleanor countered. The documents that prove everything. Something in Harmon's expression shifted, a momentary flash of genuine concern before his professional mask returned. We're done here, he said, rising. You'll be released once we've processed the paperwork. A word of advice, leave town. Start fresh somewhere. Some stories aren't worth the cost. After Harmon left, Eleanor was kept waiting for hours. Through the window, she watched nightfall, knowing Catherine and the Innocence Project investigator were searching the Whitman house for the hidden documents. Finally released with a warning not to leave town, Eleanor found Howard waiting outside in his car. Catherine found something, he said as she climbed in painfully. But so did Morris. He showed up while they were there. There was a confrontation. Is Catherine okay? Howard's grim expression told her everything. What happened? Eleanor demanded. She's alive, but they've arrested her for assaulting an officer. Howard handed Eleanor a phone. Before they took her away, she managed to send this. On the screen was a photo of a document, partially visible, clearly torn in haste from whatever hiding place it had occupied. At the top was the Horizon Developments logo, and Judge Wallace's signature beside a safety inspection form for Riverside Elementary. The damning evidence was now in play, but so was the clock, ticking down to Tommy's sentencing the following morning. Dawn broke over the courthouse as demonstrators gathered outside, some supporting Tommy, others condemning him. The media circus had reached its crescendo, with reporters speculating on the historic nature of an 8-year-old facing life imprisonment. Inside, Eleanor sat with the Innocence Project legal team, led by attorney Rebecca Chen. Despite her injuries and the restraining order, Eleanor had been granted access as a consultant to the defense, a minor miracle orchestrated by Chen's legal maneuvering. The partial document isn't enough, Chen whispered as they reviewed their limited options. Without the complete safety report showing Wallace's signature on the falsified inspection, we can't establish motive. We have Tommy's testimony, Eleanor insisted. The testimony of a traumatized child who's been heavily medicated and manipulated for weeks? Against a respected judge? Chen shook her head. We need more. Dr. Benjamin Harris joined them, sliding into the seat beside Eleanor. I've been allowed to evaluate Tommy this morning, 1 hour, supervised. And he's more lucid than he's been in weeks. They've reduced his medication, likely to make him appear normal for sentencing. Harris passed. Eleanor a folder. He made these during our session. Inside were drawings, crude but clear. One showed a tall man with a distinctive necklace standing over Marlene. Another depicted a second man watching from the doorway, a man wearing what appeared to be judicial robes. Tommy's memory is returning. Without the heavy sedation, Harris explained. He was hidden in the secret compartment but could see through a small gap. He witnessed everything. Judge Wallace entered the courtroom, his authority filling the space. Today would be merely procedural. The verdict already determined. The sentence already decided. But as the proceedings began, Chen made an unexpected move. Your Honor, the defense requests an exhumation and re-examination of Marlene Whitman's remains. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. On what grounds? Wallace demanded, visibly unsettled. New evidence suggesting the murder was committed by an adult, not a child. Chen submitted Tommy's drawings and Dr. Harris's report. The angle and force of the stab wounds would be physically impossible for a child of Tommy's size and strength to inflict. Wallace's face darkened. This is highly irregular. Additionally, Chen continued, we have evidence that Ms. Whitman discovered falsified safety reports for the Riverside Elementary Reconstruction Project. Reports bearing your signature, Your Honor. The courtroom erupted. Wallace banged his gavel furiously. These outrageous allegations have no place in my courtroom. The motion is denied, but the damage was done. Reporters were already rushing out to file updates. The public narrative was shifting. During the recess that followed, Eleanor spotted Morris and Harmon in intense conversation with Wallace in a side chamber. Their gestures were animated, panicked. Tommy sat at the defense table, clearer-eyed than Eleanor had seen him since the trial began. When their gazes met, he gave her the faintest nod of recognition. As the court reconvened, Wallace's expression was thunderous. Having reviewed the defense's motion, I find it without merit. Furthermore, I am ruling. All recent evidence inadmissible due to the manner in which it was obtained. He turned to Tommy. The verdict stands. Tommy Whitman, you are hereby sentenced to life imprisonment, without the possibility of parole. The finality of his words hung in the air. Eleanor felt a crushing defeat as Tommy was led away, his small shoulders hunched beneath the weight of injustice. Outside, reporters swarmed Eleanor and Chen. This isn't over, Eleanor told the cameras defiantly. An innocent child has been condemned to protect corrupt officials. We will not stop until justice is served. As she spoke, Eleanor didn't notice the courthouse janitor slipping a small package into her bag. A final dead drop from someone who had been silently watching the entire case unfold. Someone who had been waiting for the right moment to release the truth. Eleanor discovered the package that evening. A sealed envelope, containing a flash drive and a handwritten note. Marlene gave me this for safekeeping. I was afraid to come forward until now. Nathan Reed. The young convenience store clerk had been hiding in plain sight, working as a part-time janitor at the courthouse since losing his previous job after speaking with Eleanor. She plugged the drive into her laptop with trembling fingers. The screen filled with an audio file and several document scans. Eleanor pressed play. My name is Marlene Whitman, the clear voice began. I'm recording this as insurance. If anything happens to me or my son, the people responsible are Judge Leonard Wallace and Detective Raymond Morris. The recording continued, documenting a conversation Marlene had secretly captured in Wallace's office while cleaning. In it, Wallace and Harmon discussed the Riverside Elementary project explicitly. The corners cut, the inspections falsified, the millions of dollars diverted. The original plans called for reinforced support structures, Wallace said on the recording. We saved nearly $2 million by eliminating those. The inspection report has been adjusted accordingly. And if there's another incident like the partial collapse? Harmon asked. The modified reports protect us. No one can prove we knew the risks. The most damning exchange came next. Marlene had accidentally made a noise, revealing her presence. How much did you hear? Wallace demanded, his voice ice cold. Nothing, sir, Marlene replied. audibly frightened. "She's lying." Morris's voice joined the conversation. "Check her bag." The sound of a struggle followed, then Marlene's protests as they discovered her phone recording the conversation. "This complicates things," Wallace said calmly. "Morris, handle it. Make it clean. And find any copies she might have made." "What about the boy?" Morris asked. "He's different, isn't he? Unstable. That gives us an opportunity." The recording ended there. Marlene had created this separate audio file and hidden it, along with scanned copies of the falsified documents, before her murder. Eleanor immediately contacted Chen, who assembled the Innocence Project team for an emergency meeting. By morning, they had filed motions in federal court and delivered copies to the state attorney general and FBI. The evidence was undeniable. Within hours, federal agents arrived at the courthouse, with warrants for Wallace, Morris, and Harmon. The community watched in shock as the respected judge and his accomplices were led away in handcuffs. The case that had seemed so certain unraveled with breathtaking speed. Tommy's conviction was vacated after 3 months of psychological care and gradual medication reduction. He was released into Catherine's custody. The media that had once labeled him a monster now portrayed him as a victim of unimaginable corruption. On a crisp fall day, Eleanor visited Tommy and Catherine in their new home out of state, where they had started fresh away from the painful memories. Tommy was drawing at the kitchen table, normal childhood scenes now, without shadowy figures lurking in the background. "He has good days and bad days," Catherine told Eleanor quietly. "The therapist says he may never fully process what happened. But he's safe now," Eleanor replied. "They all are." The case had led to the discovery of 3 other children wrongfully convicted through Morris and Foster's manipulation. All had been released, their records expunged. As for the conspirators, Wallace and Morris were facing multiple life sentences. Harmon had turned state's evidence in exchange for a reduced sentence. Foster had surrendered his medical license and was awaiting trial. Before leaving, Eleanor knelt beside Tommy. "I brought you something." She placed a small box on the table. Inside was the St. Michael medallion, Morris's distinctive necklace now. An evidence exhibit that the prosecutor had allowed her to show Tommy. "The bad man's necklace," Tommy said quietly, looking at it without touching it. "Yes, and he can never use it to scare anyone again." Eleanor closed the box. "It's over, Tommy." Tommy considered this, then nodded slowly. "Mom would be happy." As Eleanor drove away, she thought about the article she had written, the one that had finally told Marlene Whitman's complete story, the one that had ended with the truth she had discovered through months of investigation. The justice system failed not because the evidence was lacking, but because those entrusted to uphold justice had the most to lose from the truth. An innocent child nearly paid the price for their corruption. And though Tommy Whitman is now free, the scars of his ordeal will never fully heal. A permanent reminder that justice delayed is not merely justice denied but humanity abandoned.